When planning any major trip, there is so much to know. Sometimes the hardest part of all is knowing where to go. Need help picking locations? Grab coffee. Let's talk. Welcome back to My Travel Window, where our goal is to help you see as much of the world as you can while you still can. Stay to the end and you can see the story behind this picture, which characterizes the biggest lesson learned from this trip. In the next several videos, I'm going to focus on how to choose destinations for European travel using our own experiences as illustration. Today's topic will be where to start. Why choose Europe? First, heritage. The vast majority of the population of North America can trace their roots to the continent of Europe. Second, diversity. It's amazing what you can see just within the span of the European continent. In the United States, we think of progression of our country in terms of decades. I remember the first time we had an experience where we stayed in a house that was already 100 years old at the time of the American Revolution. We thought that was a lot. Then we moved to another city and discovered that the house we were staying in had been built 100 years before Christopher Columbus. And then we got to Greece and we stared out on the Parthenon and onto buildings that had been there hundreds of years before Christ. So it's an amazing amount of diversity in relatively small space. Third is relative ease. Flying across the Atlantic is not quick, but it's a relatively easy plane flight to get from the United States to Europe. Traveling within Europe is easy because of the barriers between countries are relatively non-existent. Currency through much of the country is uniform, so you can have many different experiences, see all the different diversity, and have relative ease of travel. The last item is language barrier. Of all the countries, of all the areas of the world, travel in Europe is the most convenient for English speakers. So it all adds up to be a great place to visit. So what about our experience? This coming August, my wife and I are planning to take our 7th European trip in just over 7 years. Overall, we've averaged about 3 weeks a year since the spring of 2015 when we took our first trip. The map you see here is where we've been. We've covered quite a bit. Okay, let's get to the meat of today's video. What I want to give you today are 7 guidelines for picking cities in Europe. And I'll use our trip to illustrate how we did each of those things. Number 1, pick bucket list items. For us, the bucket list was Paris and Neuschwanstein. These were 2 places that my wife wanted to go, and we decided if we're only going to make one trip, that what we would do is we would plan our trip around going to Paris so that we could see the Eiffel Tower, and so that we could go to a little town in Bavaria in Germany. It's called Fussen, which is where Neuschwanstein Castle is found. So those formed the center part of our trip. Item number 2. Think about Ancestry if it matters to you. Both my wife and I have had DNA tests done and discovered that we are 100% of European extraction. You can see my results in the areas that I was from. And if I'm going to go, let's go to England. And so we decided that we would add London to our trip. 3. Don't backtrack. International trips are generally priced each way independently, so it makes no sense to waste time traveling back to your original arrival city. Pick the cities you want, put them in a line, fly back from the airport nearest your final stop. Number 4. As a rule of thumb, stay 2 days for smaller places and 3 to 4 for larger places. If you wind up staying one night in places, you're going to wear yourself out and you're going to find you're spending all your time traveling. Number 5. Go west to east, particularly when you start. Why is that? Language and culture. The culture is different. So what it does, it lets you acclimate as you go along. I take one step and then a step a little further and a little further, and we discovered that this was a marvelous way to go. Suggestion number 6. Put smaller sites between the big cities when you can. Big cities are tiring. They wear you out. Smaller places give you a chance to have a different experience. The last item, when you brainstorm, think outside the box. So, we had 3 locations on our trip. We added 2 more. One was a small seaside town in England. It's called Port Isaac. In the TV show Doc Martin, it's called Port Wynne. Our last choice, what we did is said we're moving from west to east. We don't have any particular place we want to go. We would like some place, since we're already in the mountains of Germany, what would be the nearest place there that would be interesting to us? And we found Salzburg, Austria. So those are my 7 suggestions. Start with bucket list items. Think about ancestry if it matters to you. Don't backtrack. Plan 2 days for small places, 3 to 4 for larger. Go west to east. Put smaller sites between the big cities when you can. And when you brainstorm, think outside the box. So what were the results? The location choices were perfect for us. London, Paris, Salzburg, they're A-list destinations. Almost everyone would find them fascinating and worth the trip. Port Isaac and Fusen were tailored to us. Wouldn't be worth the travel effort to everyone, but were special to us. Find places like these that you think could be special to you. We were worried about travel details and made many rookie mistakes, such as leaving my backpack unattended for about 10 minutes in a busy lobby of London Heathrow. Fortunately, we found it before an international incident occurred. A dozen other mistakes, from careless loss of my cell phone to transportation miscues, dotted the trip. They provided learning experiences and colorful stories. More than anything else, the trip taught us to be flexible and not to take ourselves more seriously than we should. By the end of the trip, we had used 12 different kinds of transportation, stayed in 7 locations, which will be subjects for another time. We experienced a train strike, unexpected bad weather, and surprising local events we had not anticipated. And we'd do it all again in a heartbeat. As promised, I close with the story of this picture. It represents the most memorable moment of our first European trip. It was Sunday morning, nearing the end of our stay in Salzburg, our last stop. Walking through the old town, the sounds of church bells and horses' hooves reverberating off the cobblestone still hung in our ears. At a bridge along the adjacent river, there stood a standing room only latte stand, and we stopped. From the other direction across the bridge came this gentleman, dressed in the formal local attire and headed for church. We don't know his name, but call him Hans because that just sounds appropriate. In broken English, Hans introduced himself. Upon discovering we were Americans, he opened up about how, as a young child, he witnessed the Allies bomb his church and his city in World War II. But the war ended, he survived, the church was repaired, and later he was able to travel to America, to the Seattle World's Fair in 1962. In less than 10 minutes, we were instant friends, although it's unlikely we'll ever see him again. From that moment, in that place, we both understood that wars will come and go, nations will rage, but people are people the world over, and the connections we make with one another are worth more than any other part of the trip. In every trip, we make many personal connections, including a dozen that I could name in this one. But in each case, there's been at least one Hans. Someone who transcended the barriers of culture and language and made a personal connection with us. We say we live to travel, and that includes seeing the sights and experiencing the food. But in reality, people like Hans are the real reason we travel. When you meet your own Hans, you will understand. Safe travels, everyone.